Ooh, what's good? My name is Axotol, and today I'm going to be doing something that personally I didn't want to make, but since it decided to keep me up until 4 in the morning for 2 days in a row now, I decided to just go ahead and do it so I can have some of that sleep stuff that everybody keeps talking about. I should also mention that I have not done any research about this kind of topic, so if I ended up coming up with the same idea as someone else, well, great minds think alike, am I right? No? Okay. So, if this wasn't obvious from the title of the video, this is going to be a series, hopefully, of things I would like to see changed to the survivors of the game. Now, as a disclaimer, I don't know anything about coding, so I don't know how much of what I'm going to suggest is even possible. That being said, every survivor is decent enough to have a, quote, god run, end quote, but as Wooly, link in the description, likes to point out, not every survivor is as consistent as doing so. The series aims to balance out the lesser used abilities, add other abilities that would be missing, for example, not every survivor has passives, or just make survivors more enjoyable / interactive to play overall because, let's face it, the optimal way to play Acrid isn't all that interesting. You kind of just run around and maybe kill a lesser wisp with your secondary and poison groups of enemies with your special while you use your utility skill to hop around like some alien kangaroo. Oh, and I should mention that all this would be on Monsoon difficulty, as that's what I normally play on. Alright, so let's dig into it. The survivor we're going to be talking about today is going to be Commando. Obviously. Now, first things first, his default primary is absolutely beautiful. In my opinion, it's probably the best primary in the game, as long as you have the insane aim of a freshman in high school, or at the very least, the basics of knowing how to use a mouse. Personally, I would not change anything about his default primary. From what I can tell, Commando shoots about 6 times in 1 second, is a proc coefficient of 1, which I think is the best in the game for other range primaries taking in other factors. For example, Huntress's base primary also has a proc coefficient of 1, but has that stupid auto aim and fires much slower than Commando does. On top of that, Commando's primary has pretty decent accuracy and range. It's just really good in most cases. So that forces me to sit there and think of another primary that would be just as good, or at least viable to use, and while maybe not the most thought out, I did come up with multiple ideas. So the first is more on the simpler side of things. Give him a marksman rifle that pierces the first enemy hit, and only the first enemy, and does more damage to the second enemy, much like how a secondary phase round works. Make it fire at half the speed, so around 2 to 3 shots per second, and keep a proc chance of 1 for each enemy hit. Meaning that if a shot hits the second target, the proc chance stays the same as the first enemy. Oh, and give him infinite ammo. None of that artificer crap. In my opinion, this should be decent as to what he's got now. To me though, that option is kinda dull, so the one I would like to see most is the second option I came up with. Give him a revolver, same ammo count as the others. Again, none of that artificer crap. But what makes it unique is that it shoots hollow point rounds. If you don't know what those are, essentially when the bullet strikes an object, it'll break up into tiny sections and spread outwards into the target while allowing for extra penetration. Now, I don't know for sure exactly how it works, but that's my rough understanding of it. So here's what we can have those rounds act like in game. The first option is how Borderlands 3 does it. Another great game, by the way, you should check it out. Essentially, when you kill an enemy with critical damage, they explode, dealing damage to their allies. Risk Range 2 iteration can be something along the lines of for every killing blow dealt by the projectile itself, like Bandit special interactions, they deal maybe 40% damage in a 2 to 3 Hopu radius. Honestly, the number doesn't matter too much from my end, my goal is just trying to get these ideas out there. And while I like this idea a lot, we can go down a path that Hopu themselves made. The newest character, at the time of recording this mind you, is Bandit, the one I mentioned earlier. His secondary ability allows him to apply hemorrhage on crits. Now, if we apply that directly to the presented idea, that would be insane. Imagine a second loop commando that applies hemorrhage with every hit. Absolutely disgusting. So if we tone it down to maybe a 10% chance per initial hit, maybe we got something interesting going on there. Of course, to balance it out, make it shoot like 3 to 4 shots per second. Make it scale less with attack speed overall. Commando's suppressive fire shoots more based on how much attack speed you have. Since that number exists, I'm assuming that the scaling itself can be changed. If you want to get frisky with it, give the balancing like a 0.7 proc chance if it needs it. Of course, hemorrhage only applies to the primary attack and wouldn't affect his other skills like suppressive fire. On top of that, it also wouldn't proc off of like ukuleles or ATG missiles. Now you might be like, well, that's kind of busted late game because you could just stack hemorrhage insanely fast. And to that I say, this is Commando we're talking about. He's gonna be pretty busted late game anyway, and it's not like hemorrhage does that much damage to begin with. But this option does have an interaction that perfectly suits Commando, Deathmark. To be honest, while it's not impossible to proc the thing, the ways of doing so aren't many. You have Bleed from Tri-Tips, which require multiple stacks to work efficiently, Gasoline, which needs an enemy to be killed near the target you want to mark, Runolds, which you can't proc normally unless you have grenades or phase round, Chronobauble, which is a Chronobauble, and red or boss items, which you shouldn't rely on anyway due to the insane inconsistency of getting those items to begin with. Altogether, you have 2 consistent items that you can rely on, and that's Tri-Tip and Chronobauble. It's much easier to proc Deathmark on other characters like Artificer, Rex, or Acrid. Look, while I don't think Deathmark is end-all be-all, it's a nice quality of life change for Commando that gives him some easy breathing room before the second loop. Honestly, I think that this alternative primary is a really good option from the base ability. Now, onto his secondaries. As they are now, I don't think they're anything special to begin with. Ever since Phase Blast came out, I just never touched Phase Round, his base secondary, the one that probably no one else uses either. Anyways, let's start with the good one, Phase Blast. I got nothing. It's pretty good when it came out, and it'll probably always be acceptable throughout the lifespan of the game. It shines really well before the first loop, but after that his primary usually just kills everything, and at the end of the day I think that's totally fine. It gives him an answer to early game single target damage, which he really needed. Just gives him that extra oomph whenever he needs to kill those ninja Lumerians or the Bellboys, the spooky stuff. His base secondary, on the other hand, recently got a minor buff to where it deals extra damage the more times it passes through enemies. Honestly, that right there is a great buff to start out with. Hello, future me here. Not only am I intruding, but I am also taking over. So as I was writing out this part of the video, I learned that for some reason, something about how phase round works isn't clear. At base, it deals 300% damage and gains 40% per enemy hit. So it should take Commando to hit 4 enemies in order to proc Ajaro and Runald's bands. But it doesn't work that way for some reason. While testing this out, I saw that the damage values work as stated, but for some reason, the bands proc on the second hit instead of the 4th, and it also says this on the wiki. Which means that there's some black magic at work here, and we need to get our torches and a duck and start a good old-fashioned witch hunt. I'm kidding, but seriously, Hopu, what the heck is going on here? Now, while this interaction might have been in the game since that changed to phase round, I never touched the thing, so I didn't know about it until I started to make this video. Anyways, the secondaries part was a little bit short compared to the last section, but that's a good thing because I didn't have to think as hard. Yay! No, I'm kidding. Honestly, I think both are fine as of right now, but phase round just feels bad to use in my opinion. Now, if you want to get a bit spicy with it, just let it stun enemies, hit, or give it a slow. The slow might even be better because, Deathmark procs, but I digress. Alright, so utility skills on the other hand, I do have decent ideas for. As of right now, I think there is no reason to use his base skill over the newer one. Tactical Dive is just inferior to use in every single situation except when used mid-air. His new skill is just too good. It travels much farther, you can change the direction mid-use, you can shoot while using it, and after all of that, you can still break your momentum from falling while not breaking your ankles. Tactical Dive just sucks in general. So now that I'm done hating, it's time for its makeover. Now this might be a little bit radical of a change, but imagine, just for a second, that Tactical Dive gave iframes. Though, yeah, you might be right. Psych! If we use our memories, there was an old game made years ago called Risk of Rain. I know, huge coincidence, right? Crazy. All jokes aside though, old Commando already had iframes. I don't know the reason why he doesn't in the second game, but I think bringing it into the game would at least get me started thinking about trying it out again. And for some reason, if that's not enough for your greed, make it reset all its cooldowns. At least one charge, Bandolier style. My god, at that point I think that if Tactical Dive had any or all of those changes, it would be hard to choose between either. Tactical Dive would just be much better for a defensive playstyle, while Tactical Slide would allow you to keep the DPS going and be more agile. The thing I'm worried about though is purity. Imagine spamming iframes that fast. I don't think it would be too much of an issue because the negative luck that comes with it, but maybe it'll be too strong. I don't know. I don't use purity that much, but I would definitely start somewhere around there. That being said, I got two more areas to talk over in the rest of this video. The first would be the special skills, and the second, but nowhere near as important as the first, would be some potential passive skills. Of course, the passive isn't necessary, but since other survivors have passives, why not try to give him one? Alright, specials. Now I want you to imagine something for me real quick. Yes, again, we're using our imagination. Imagine Commando's base primary attack, right? Now imagine if it's scaled at least twice as much off of attack speed. Pretty good, right? But wait, there's more. If you call right now, we'll throw in the ability to stun on every hit. Now you may be asking, well, what's the catch? Surely there must be something that is worse than his primary, right? No. Literally every single stat of his suppressive fire is the same or better except a cooldown which can be reset and or lowered in multiple ways. Imagine you're on the second loop and you manage to get some guillotines and a brain stocks. Commando just went from dual pistol boyo to him being a minigun that procs everything at the normal rate. Sounds pretty good, right? Honestly, I love this ability so much after the attack speed update that I hardly touched his nades after they came out. So because I love it so much, I don't think anything needs to be changed. Now on that note, let's talk about his nades. I hate these things a lot. I believe that they increased the quote weight, so they're less bouncy an update or two ago, but holy heck, they still feel terrible to use. Now since I hardly touch them, I'll be quick about this section due to my inexperience. All in all, here are some things to just make them feel better to use. The first is to have them deal max damage for the entire radius. For me, the radius is pretty small to begin with, and then you need to get the center portion of it to hit in order to do max damage with the thing. The second thing they could change is an increase to the radius of the explosion. That would also solve the problem of trying to hit the sweet spot. And the third thing is to make them explode on impact. That would limit the range by quite a bit, but make them so much easier to use overall. You gotta remember that the terrains aren't entirely flat, so one little bump and there it goes, completely in the direction of where you weren't trying to aim. Also, having them become impact grenades mean that you can hit flying enemies. My god, trying to hit anything that flies with these things suck. Now you can be saying, don't use them on the flying enemies, 5 head? And to that I say, yeah, that's fair. But now you've limited your kit and how they interact with flying enemies. So let's see what you've got. Equipment, maybe. Primary, sure, that's fair. Phase blast, wait, that's a shoddy. So what about phase round? Yeah, okay, man. But what about suppressive fire? Well, that don't work because you're trying to use the nades. My point is, if you're using the nades, you limit yourself to 2 abilities in order to try and take out flying enemies. Oh, and did I mention that there's a slight homing to suppressive fire? And before you say that it's not a big deal, I'd say you're right. Until you get an overloading greater wisp fight on 5th stage. Now what? You're gonna use that prey on? We all know you're gonna miss the big boy hit. Look, if you want to use grenades, go ahead, but if you think that they don't need a change or a buff, then you're lying to yourself. Also, Hopu, if you don't think that we can get a little Molotov action going with these nades, I think that'd be pretty lit. Just another idea, that's all. And finally, last and certainly least, the passive section. Honestly, a passive is not as needed, but I decided to come up with one for consistency's sake. Basically, Commando has a more aggressive playstyle than most of the other survivors, and as such should get a passive to complement him. So after much thinking about the ideas that could work and are unique, and toying about how they should be balanced, I gave up. This is the simplest and most balanced thing that I could think of after all of that. As Commando gets kills, he gains a stack of bonus move speed and attack speed. This stacks up to 15 times for a total of 15%. Stacks reset on going below 50% max HP or beginning a new stage. This results to 1 free soldier syringe and goat hoof, which is pretty big early on and less so later in the game. Passives like Mercenary and Artificer also act in the same way, that early on they're pretty good but are less useful late game. I had a really tough time coming up with a passive that I felt fit Commando. I also did come up with other stuff that ultimately ended up being bad for the same reason Old Whip was bad. So at the end, this is all I got. Otherwise, the way the passive I mentioned would scale off of how long in the stage you were in. For instance, the longer time you spent in stage, the more attack and move speed you gained. The issue I had with that idea though is that it didn't feel impactful enough and also became much stronger in Rainstorm and Drizzle to the point that it could be highly abused, more so than in Monsoon. So those are just some of the ideas that I would like to see put into the game. Will they be? I have no idea, nor does it matter all that much in the end. I just decided to have fun coming up with ideas one night and was like, I could do a series on this kind of thing. And with that, my name has been Axotol, and this has been Operation Unused Commando. Make sure you drink some water, and I will be there when you tune in next time. Now go to sleep.